Hi folks, the purpose of this brief video is to review with you the strategies that you and your group will need to use when you're analyzing either the professional photograph that you've chosen or the painting that you guys have chosen to analyze for your visual rhetorical analysis, which is your group project. So the place that you want to start when you begin this analysis is with your own initial personal reactions to what you see. And what you want to do is think about what you're seeing and what it might mean. In other words, what is the artist or photographer's intended meaning here, the deeper meaning, and what does it make you feel when you see it? So what you have to do first is communicate what you see. So when you look at a painting like this, what you don't want to necessarily do is only just describe what you're seeing. In other words, you wouldn't want to say here, I see a hand and it's holding a tree, and in the tree there are birdhouses. Well, obviously you're going to have to describe that some, but the more important thing is your interpretation of the underlying meaning. In other words, what might this tree represent? What might this hand represent? What might each of those birdhouses represent? And what about the colors of those birdhouses? What about the roots of the tree and the hand? All of these different things. In other words, there's a more deeper symbolic meaning that the artist is attempting to communicate here. And so that's sort of what you want to get at is, what you see is the meaning and how you're reacting to each of these things that you see. So what you want to do is start with a personal response. So what we're going to do is take a close look at a painting that I really like a lot. It's by a contemporary artist. Her name is Julie Heffernan. She has a large body of work. Most of these are oil paintings, I believe. She is in museums across the country. I consider a lot of what she does to be sort of surrealistic in a way. She uses color a lot. She uses birds, animals, butterflies, things like this a lot in her paintings. So the title of this one is called A Portrait of Self as Agnostic. Now, a title of a work is extremely important, so you want to be sure that you're looking at the title of the painting or the photograph that you have in front of you when you're doing this analysis, because that title is very important. It's just like the title of your essay in the sense that it conveys to the reader what the content of your entire essay is going to be, and it sort of sets up an expectation for them. Same thing is true of a title of a painting or a photograph. It conveys to you or gives you a clue about what the expectation would be for the underlying meaning of the painting. So what we're going to do is begin with just your personal reaction to this. So what I mean by your personal response and reaction is, how do you interpret the artist or photographer's intended meaning here? What is the underlying meaning? And so when you look at this painting by Julie Heffernan, what is the general feeling that you get when you view it? Emotionally, what does it make you feel? What mood does it create for you? What is your emotional response to it? And is that emotional response somehow a response to the colors that are used within the work? What do you see as its key elements and features? How do your own experiences or knowledge affect your reading of the image? And go back to that title again, Portrait of Self as Agnostic. Well, what does that mean to be agnostic? And what is your own personal knowledge or experiences with maybe being uncertain about something, or your experiences with religion or the idea of God? Is there a story that's going on in that painting? Are there historical, cultural, political, sociological, economic, or cultural attitudes that are reflected there? Now, initially in a personal response, you may not be able to answer all of these questions, so don't feel like you have to, but you want to answer as many of them as you possibly can. And what we're going to do is we're going to take those personal responses, and then we're going to begin by digging into a much more detailed analysis, because what we're going to do is, instead of looking at this painting as a whole, is we're going to take its smaller component pieces and we're going to analyze those and look at what they may mean. And after we've analyzed each little piece, we're going to put them back together again and then say, okay, this is what I think the underlying meaning is. So when you begin with that personal response, this is just your initial thought about what the underlying meaning might be, and that might be very different than the analysis that you arrive at the conclusion when you begin to go back and put together the small pieces again and say, okay, after I've looked at all these small pieces, now this is what I see. So that initial reaction and the conclusion that you arrive at later on may be very different from one another. So let's take a very close look at this painting again. Again, think about some of the things that you're reacting to, where your eyes drawn first. Take a good close look at the colors, the placement of items, that type of thing. And these are the types of things that we're going to analyze as we move forward in developing a more detailed analysis. So the first thing that you want to start with when you begin your analysis is the big picture. So what is it that you notice first about that image of Julie Heffernan's, that painting? Where are your eyes drawn first and why? And then think about how it is that the artist or photographer draws your eye there. Do they use line in a particular way, or is it arrangement that moves your eyes in that direction? And then think about, why would the artist wish to draw your eyes in that direction? Or why is it that the artist is making this particular section the focal point of the piece? In other words, what you need to think about is, what is it they're attempting to emphasize? So let's take a look at that painting again and think about. So when I look at this painting, the first thing that I notice is the body, or what's left of this body, that is dead center in front of the fireplace. Now there's a couple ways that my eye is drawn there, and it's through the line of the fireplace, in other words, and the mirror as well. Between the fireplace and the mirror, those two things are making me look sort of dead center. The body's in front of that black space in front of the fireplace, and the lines, the outer lines of the fireplace, are enclosing the body. So we sort of look here, we also see the fire, but all this is framed by the lines of the mirror and the fireplace. So we sort of look center, and then when we look center, we see the fire and the darkness of the fireplace, and the blue dress and the darkness of the fireplace. So the body's sort of enclosed in that. But we also look there because of the placement of each of these birds. So each of the birds is sort of moving in the direction of the body. So that makes us look dead center as well. So what you have to ask yourself is, okay, why is it that this particular artist, Heffernan, wants to draw my eye there? So you probably can't really see it very well in this photo, but what you have here on top of what's left of this body is a castle that is on fire. And then it looks like maybe there are little butterflies that are trailing off out of the fire itself. And then there are some acorns on, well, what looks like acorns, or they could be snail shells, either one. I think they're acorns though, that are on the black floor here. So what you would want to think about is, okay, why is it that the author of this text, which we will assume is, we'll call the painter, why is it that this painter wants to emphasize this? And then probably what you're going to need to do is, again, think back to the title of this piece, which is Portrait of Self as Agnostic. So an agnostic is someone who is a skeptic, who believes that human beings sort of lack the understanding that we really need to possess in order to understand matters of faith in God and the universe. So if this person that we see, whose body has apparently burst into flame, and now there's like this castle that must have been on the inside of the body that is now aflame, and there are butterflies coming out of the flame here, what we want to think about is, okay, what might this mean? Perhaps there are many conclusions you could draw about this, but what you need to think about is, why do you think the painter has emphasized this? Now, this paper that you're going to write is 100% your group's opinion, and so essentially it's going to be your interpretation about why the artist would draw the photographer's eye, the artist or photographer would draw your eye in that direction and to that particular point. So it's important to keep in mind that as long as you can point to your text, which is going to be the painting or the photograph, and explain why you believe what you believe, then your answer will be correct. But you have to point to the evidence and explain how you arrive at your conclusion. Another thing you want to do after you've sort of looked at the big picture is, think about who your cast of characters are. You want to look at, men, women, children, animals, and it's really important that when you choose your image, whatever it is, whether it be a painting or a photograph, that you be sure there are actually people or animals in that image. You don't want to try to analyze a landscape, because a landscape is typically just that. It's just a landscape, and there isn't necessarily, a lot of deeper meaning to that particular painting's message. So be sure that whatever you choose, you have people in that image, or animals. So the first thing you want to do is you want to look at facial expression and poses, hairstyles, ages, sex, ethnicity, possible education, suggested occupations, and apparent relationships to one another. So let's take a look at that other painting again, and let's think about what some of these things might mean and what they might tell us. So in the center again we have an individual, and by the look of the pose, the person looked to be perhaps somewhat calm. Perhaps they were standing and looking into a mirror when their body burst into flame. So when someone is looking into a mirror, what is it they're attempting to see? They're attempting to see themselves. However, when this person was looking into this mirror, their body burst into spontaneous combustion here, and a flame, and so now there's this castle that is on fire. So what you want to do is, think about what you think those things might mean. In other words, what meanings are suggested there. Now if you look at the birds around her, and then there are different types, different colors, and then there are these butterflies, you'd want to ask yourself, okay, well, what about these cast of characters here? Now if you notice the positioning of the birds, that sort of tells us something about these birds. Most of them are sort of pointed at her, and they look like they're sort of like in an attack mode, like they're being very antagonistic in a way. So what might those birds mean? What might each of these birds represent? So if we're looking at the title of this as Portrait of Self as Agnostic, perhaps they represent different views of faith, and each of these views of faith is sort of attacking her view of herself. If you recall, we said she was looking in the mirror at herself, perhaps. So each of these different views of God and under our understanding of the universe is causing her to reevaluate who she is. And what's happened here is she's burst into flame. Now, what is it that birds represent in general? Birds represent freedom because they have the freedom of flight. Butterflies also fly. Butterflies, we could also say, represent freedom, and these butterflies are coming out of the flame. So literally, freedom is coming out of the flame, and that might remind you of a story from mythology that you might remember from high school about how the phoenix rises from the ashes again. In other words, something is born of destruction. So if who this person was is now being destroyed, what will rise out of the ashes of this destruction? So that's something for you to think about. And then again, of course, there are all these acorns on the floor here. What does an acorn represent? Well, an acorn is the seed of an oak tree, essentially, and when one of these falls from an oak tree onto the ground and it becomes part of the soil, it is actually a seed for something else. It's a seed for new life. So in a way, these acorns represent sort of the same thing that this whole phoenix sort of idea represents here, this rising from the ashes thing. New life rises from the seed of an acorn. A new tree is born. So we could say, in a way, perhaps these represent new identities or new ways of seeing oneself. So sort of what we've done here is, in our analysis, we have arrived at what our story might be, what is perhaps taking place and perhaps what the action is.